give more time to all the presenters. I've got 8 minutes left, so I'm going to cut down my hour and 1/2 long session to about 7 minutes here. And if I can get my, can you know how to shut this down so I can get to my, there we go, we can do it. But I want to thank the presenters this morning. When we go back and make some suggestions, especially with some of the conversations this morning that I could see people wanted, that it makes sense to reconfigure at least this particular session to allow for some more interaction and some longer presentations, because we got beautiful stuff to go on with. Which one?
This one.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to get right into it. Bonjour and DeMain Maganaduk Skabewis and Dejinikaz. My name is Skabewis. English name is Paul DeMain. I do some part-time work in the Great Lakes area with the Intertribal Agricultural Council for the last year on wild rice in syruping and sapping. And it's really phenomenal. And I just wanted to start with use it or lose it. That's me on the right side. That's Niba Gijik or Archie Mose on the left side. And in the middle is Pipe Mustache from Le Coudray. For people who've been around ceremonial activities, they'll recognize Pipe and Archie. They're both passed away. I was their driver when I was a young kid. This is where I'm at an age where they're calling me up on Friday afternoon and saying, we're headed over to a ceremony at so place on Saturday. I want to go out and drink and snag tonight. Come on, give me a break. Around, and in it, conversations that are outside of the box, and I think I want to leave that impression with people. Because the presentation we had about the Menominee here and the lands that were worked there, and the conceptual idea that Native people weren't farmers, is disproven by looking at the history and by talking to people, by looking at what Indigenous people did with corn, what they did with tobacco, what they did with rice in terms of reseeding, going to different places and getting rice from other kinds of lakes and reseeding it to make a better stock of rice or a different flavor of rice. And I think we're only on the front end of beginning to discover these things. Same conversation we had yesterday, where we're beginning to learn that when we talk about maple trees, you know, if you're thinking like pancakes, get out of the room the next time you see me, okay? I don't want to talk with maple. We made sugar, and we made hundreds of different products from sugar. We tapped walnuts, we hickory trees, box elder, numerous kinds of trees. There's a ironwood tap down here because people want to find out what happens with that sap in terms of medicine. Heard that people have tapped. So we've heard that story. We says, well, maybe it's time for us to tap a tree and begin to try to figure out what was. Box thinking is like when I went to the Mashantucket Pequot tribe 20 years ago, when you could walk into the tribal trailer and wave at Skip Hayward and go to the archaeological department. Unburied a Pequot over here, and we got all the artifacts. Check out Pipestone, Minnesota. He says, why would you say that? He says, well, you know, it's a pipestone, comes from Pipestone, Minnesota. Okay. I looked at it and I says, that doesn't look like it came from Pipestone, Minnesota. And he says, well, where would it come from? I says, well, as is the only pipestone quarry in the world, I'll tell you that Le Coudray has one on its reservation. And there's another one in Barron County by Rice Lake that's been buried for. The ground is so matted down from people working it that nothing's grown up in the area of that quarry. I told Wayne Rios, I says, I think that might have come from Le Coudray. It doesn't look like Minnesota pipestone. For some other of their doings, I brought a sample from Minnesota and the Le Coudray Ojibwe. Now this guy was saying this pipe has been buried for a couple hundred years along with the Pequot that had it. A couple hundred years. Okay, but it came from Le Coudray. Interesting enough, Pipe Mustache had told me a story just about a year earlier about what in 1914 he was working the pipestone quarry with his grandfather, and ho-chunks that had come up from the south when 5 people rode up on horses. And he says, I had never seen a black Indian I had ever seen. It is unbelievable. And he was riding this big white horse, and then he had these like 4 stragglers that were with him, mixed breeds, you know, that hung around with him. And I says, where did they come from? They came from Connecticut. Okay. Wow. I says, do you remember what tribe? He says, the only thing I remember is a conversation about how they were not Mohegans, which is consistent with the Pequot tradition of the 2 brothers breaking up and the one brother becoming Christianized and heading the Mohegans, and the Pequots being the traditionalists, not the pagans, pick up on the language, the traditionalists that wouldn't give up on their ceremonies and everything, and then experience the wrath of Captain John, whatever his name is, that destroyed their history. And the next question was, well, why would they have not gone to Minnesota? Well, Minnesota was Dakota territory, and it was hostile territory for any Algonquin. So if the Algonquins in Connecticut knew it, it's likely that people in Michigan knew about it, and other Algonquin-speaking people, because that's where they went to get their pipestone outside of hostile territory. So those are all discoveries in the thinking process. The other end of that, and I'm going to run through this real, just, you know, rice. I had lots of things to say about rice. There's a Manu Manini on a rice bed. Had lots of discussions about rice today, and we're going to just run through this. But here is something that I did last fall. 11 lakes, 12 different samples. 11 different lakes, 11 different colors, 11 different sizes, 11 different flavors from Wisconsin and Minnesota. Wild rice is not just wild rice any more than honey comes in one brand or one color, or syrup tastes the way it does at Le Coudray, the way it does at Gun Lake. It doesn't. The minute we tasted the syrup over here, we knew there was a difference. And so in the long run, we want to think about how to brand all these different marketable products and keep our own identity. You know, wood-fired, smoky, you know, off of the treaty kettle or off of the pan or whatever it may be. We're not RO. We're not Uncle Ben's in the maple industry. We are the real stuff, and we're still doing it. But we're getting back to some of the traditional ways of bringing those products in, rather than using the round taps and some of the other processes that we picked up. The last sample on the right side, if you look at this, it's actually got some popped rice in it. Okay, we threw some in the treaty kettle and parched it that way. It was too hot. It popped. So we took it off and set it on the side. It says, let's thrash it and see what we can do with it. I ran into a woman from the Bad River Reservation by the name of Annie Madey and says, give me some of that. I haven't seen that for years, you know, because everyone's gone to these mechanical processes. They're not doing it in the kettle as much. Grandpa would always bring that stuff because white people wouldn't want to buy it. It's ununiform, you know, like all your tomatoes got to be exactly the same. Sugar's got to be real white. Flour's got to be real white. Mashed potatoes got to be the inside and real white. You throw away all the nutritional stuff. She says, that was flawed rice. That was an accident. It's the smokiest, most flavor, and we got it all the time, and I love it because that's what we ate first in my family. I'll take all you can get. We discovered another brand or another idea that was outside of the box. But looking for that diversity, you know, think outside of the box when we're thinking about what we want to do with our products. Once we get them into our households, into the commodity food shops, into our elderly centers, and how can we get the best value out of the products that we do have excess revenues on. The treaty fight goes on in Minnesota. They can't get their ticket, like we couldn't get a ticket in the Harvest Education Learning Project for camping late in the Pinokies that we could take into federal court, because the lawyers have said, don't give them a ticket. Just take their nets, just take their spears and everything else, but don't give them a ticket. You give them a ticket, they'll get into federal court and win something out of it. This is an attempt to get a ticket by violating the laws in Minnesota under the Treaty of 1855, where they're not recognizing the right to hunt and fish and do other accustomed things off the reservation. Historic pictures of the treaty kettle and sugaring, the traditional way of stirring your sugar. And yesterday we were asking questions about why in the treaty notes from the 1800s they've got 66-pound packs of sugar here, 65 at Le Coudray, 65 in Minnesota. Why 65 pounds? Why isn't it 45, or why isn't it 70 or 80? But there's some answer about how those 65-pound packages in muckhucks fit somewhere, or there was a weight measure, or there's some reason. So it's like right out of the blue, there's a question for the intellects from college that'll probably be answered by some old man that'll say, well, here's the easy answer for you college-educated people, because Old Man Mustache was always saying, it's like the crop circles in England, Do you believe in alien beings? I asked Pipe Mustache. Of course. And then he started talking about Seven Sisters and Gigi Gukwe being lowered to the earth. He says, we got all kinds of stories about life in outer space. I said, Bill, what were they doing in a cornfield in England? He goes, God damn college-educated Indians. Maybe they like corn. All right, here's some of the figures that I wanted to give you. My grandmother's diary from 1870. February 28th, 900 trees in 300 days, 2 adults, 3 kids. May 2nd, come out of the woods with 1,000 pounds of sugar that she sold for 16 cents. She was so proud she got 2 cents more a pound, $160. Now, when I did all my formulas, my intellectual formulas, I couldn't account for 200 pounds. She kept it for the family, stupid, right there, 200 pounds for the family. At $18 a pound, I'm selling mine for $25 now in my store. I refuse to take anything less. That's $18,000 for 64 days worth of work between 2 adults. Menominee data, 75,000 pounds of sugar, 9,375 gallons, and 2014 prices at $55 a gallon or $18 a pound. $1,350,000. I had someone come and tell me, well, Indian people didn't sell their sugar. I think maybe conceptually at some point, with the trees being cut and everything else, and families going out and sapping and getting what they could to survive, someone says, we don't sell our sugar, we save it for the family, kind of a concept, because there's ample evidence that not only was there farming going on, because you go to Madeline Island and you find all kinds of evidence of corn, beans, and squash from all kinds of places in the United States being sown out there. You got the Menominee experience that proves that Indians were farmers, even though they were still doing they were still hunting and fishing and everything else. But here's the data from Ontonagon, Michigan in 1880. Phenomenal numbers, 248,000 pounds. When you look at the value of that in 2014 prices per pound at $18, I'm selling it for $25, $4.4 million. But as we looked for our farm records, here's the other one. We went, holy cripes. This is everybody from the babies in the diaper to grandma and grandpa collecting sap and knowing how to de-ice it and knowing how to be as efficient as possible, even though they're using yokes, they're using birch bark containers, there's no tubing, there's no fancy evaporators or anything else. 2014 prices at $18 a pound, $8 million of commerce. What are they doing? Selling to East Coast business who are using it to help preserve things and to make rum, is what I've been told. Some of the other numbers real quick, and I'm almost out of here, frankly, because we don't have the time and I want you to get fed. When you look at ricing reports from 1897, The Ojibwe supposedly are taking 10,000 pounds, the Dakota 6,000, Menominee 1,500, Sac and Fox 2,500, Ho-Chunk 2,000, Potawatomi. I don't think they have all the numbers, but 30,000 pounds at one rice lake in northern Wisconsin called Prairie Rice Lake, or Mushkode Menominee Cane. Observation is the lake could feed 2,000 people all by itself. Huge areas. That rice bed is totally gone. They raised the lake 2.5 feet for recreational reasons and killed off the rice crop on that particular lake. 1864 Tribal Economy Report, maple sugar $15,000 or 150,000 pounds, fur 40,000, potatoes 3,000, corn 1,500, and wild oats or wild rice 26,000. So wild rice was 31% of the total economy. Maple sugar was about 15% of the sales economy. It also says in 1864 that the community is now 10% civilized labor, and the rest is all natural Indian labor. Okay, so when we're looking at these potential products, you can see why at Ontonagon, Bay over there on the right of this side here are the maple industry numbers that they are. Of maple trees, birch, ironwood, and a wild onion district interdispersed within that. A picture which shows the traditional wafers, or whatever you want to call them. They aren't holes with taps in the trees. They are wafers that drip down. When you pull them out, the bark kind of falls back into place. They heal a lot faster. It's not a 3-inch hole in there. So we really want to think about how we might be able to get back to some of these sapping techniques that are closer to the sugar membrane and not sucking out as much core water that you got to boil off again, and how this might have less impact on the tree, because I think we had a good practices policy and manual a couple hundred years ago. Someone lost it, and and that was it. But I think we knew how to figure out high sugar content trees. We knew how to let the trees heal themselves better, and we knew how to produce high volume because the facts and numbers are there. I wanna leave you with two real quick thoughts here before we go to lunch. I was out on the Yakima Nation Reservation talking with a guy by the name of Delbert Wheeler, who is into tobacco and lots of other things, wood products and everything else. He was telling me about the Treaty of 1855 at Walla Walla and how it was one of the few treaties that was not only translated into English, but several of the dialects between the Yakima Confederated bands, because they had been warned by people, get it in writing in your own language. There's a section there where they're beginning to negotiate about not being able to go to Seattle or Walla Walla on the Columbia River anymore because they're being pushed to a reserved area. You want to talking about the issue of taxation from coming back and say, are you going to tax this? Are you going to trade goods? And they start talking about buffalo robes and Cherokee tobacco and blueberries and wild rice and wampum and sugar products, things that aren't what the treaty says. It says this was a all over the West. People were enumerating what it was that was out there, and there are products. St. Louis Seaway. Other explorers back and forth the United States, you saw a big, huge We want to get back to that kind of a concept. And so here's what it is. What is the price? No, let's just suggest that there might be oil. What would the tribal council do? You know, it's like, hey, you know, we got to figure out if there's oil. But what's the price today of a gallon of gas? Okay, I'm selling a gallon of my syrup, Pinoki Gold, $100 a gallon because, again, I demand it. You want to go to Ross and get some of that RO produced stuff for $55 a gallon, drive gas back and forth to get it, it's worth it. At $100 a gallon, where are the values in the end product? And we've got all these trees on a lot of our reservations. We have access to all these trees in the national and state parks under our treaty rights. We need to use it or we'll lose it. So miigwech for coming in today, and get down and get some good food to eat. I'm sure the chefs have prepared something great today. Thank you.
Well, can you take a couple questions?
Yeah, a couple questions real quick.
I had one, talked with Jerry Jondro up at KVIC. He was trying to convince his tribal council that, you know, they're wanting to sell some of the woods for foresting, just sell the wood off, make some quick money. But he was trying to explain to them exactly what you just said. You know, we keep the tree, we have the potential to make a hell of a lot more money from now to eternity.
The same answer came from the Iron County Forest Department when we said at the Harvest Education Learning Project, which was a camp set up to fight a mine simply by gathering and food preparation and coffee and fry bread every day, and invite people up and take them on walks and show to the mill for board feet. And we don't want to make $8 to $12 off of that tree in syrup every single year. But you can do other things with it as well. That first, plan your tapping out. Say if you out in the next few years to make sure that the crown talk to an artist, because what the other one, what happened? $100 at the mill when you get it there, right? Hey, I've got this maple tree and we're going to cut it down and shape intrusions onto the tree as it kills off the sugar pines. Think about how this might look if we're going to cut it this way. Two tribal forestry departments. Why are we managing things for to our tribal councils and our own forestry departments and say ask dumb questions. But let's start over and think about how this works with our natural environment. One more question and fired move around and take the hull. When it was poured in there and the rice, pop it on a dry stove. Question that I haven't thought of. That might have been on, you know, you get them vessels, but yeah, that's probably a good answer. But again, we're probably could.
Oh, yeah.
Dale, did you have a question?
Not a particular strain of rice, it's the temperature of the kettle that made it.
It's not a really big puffy thing. It just puffs rice. It's lighter and floats higher and goes.
Automatically considered organic to be sold, or do you have to go through the USDA regulation?
Certification process, and certify my lake. There, maybe now. We've had discussions with Bruce Savage up in Minnesota. Or that river, see? Because unlike the vegetable products out of wild areas, you can't spray paint your maple. I think at this particular point, the native community has in that process, so keep your ears open, because tribes can perhaps write their own regulations and to pick them up rather than the other way around, I think. Some maple operations that what's all going on at all the components, you know, of them as you begin to farm those further out in terms of we can't get it because of that whole certification, which is kind of out of our control.
A couple of years ago, and I think when we combine native certification with a whole new market for us to explore, because then it just doesn't exist right now. Scattergun approach, but we really don't have something that exists on a nationwide basis right now.
Potentials, but we have a huge market in Europe. Huge problem because European countries are rejecting GMO and genetically modified and non-organic stuff from the United States. Food anymore. So I think we've got a real good potential to begin developing some of these streams of products coming into our community. And the first notion is we ought to be feeding our family. We ought to be getting it into our community cupboards and households, and into the nutritional feeding sites, elderly sites, the schools. And then if there's excess products, get the best value from somewhere. It already is in part, because it is bringing interest in that. 10 years ago, harvesting and foraging and those kinds of words weren't in the verbiage of USDA. I think they've built in a lot of stuff so that in the USDA language, and we continue to impact that not only in the legislation, in administrative rulemaking. I wanted to show you one last slide. That's the United States in 1860 on top with 6 million gallons compared to Canada at 1.8. If you look at what happened is the acquisition of the cane sugar islands in Hawaii and then beet sugar coming into the market, and maple sugar being very expensive compared to those, all the way down to 1965 when the U.S. was producing less than 1 million gallons of syrup. Now look at what happened to Canada. Canada has taken off, and they're now producing 11 million gallons, and the U.S. is lagging way behind in terms of where we are. Now if you go to Japan and order rice pudding tomorrow morning, you're going to get a little thing of cream, a little saucer of maple cream, and it might even say Indian maple cream or American Indian maple cream, even if it's made by Mrs. Butterworth or the Koch brothers, because Japanese people know that maple is an indigenous product. As far as I know, there isn't a single product as it's served out. My stomach that's growling. Thank you, thank you.
Very cool.
I've got a copy of it. You might as well just keep it on.
Yeah, so it's nice to meet you. I didn't. Sure enough, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Marty.
Then there's that part that was cut off. Trying to get that upper governors and legislature people way back then took the documents home. They destroyed them or whatever. Can't find them. So